I'm going to continue a little bit on what Lloyd started with, and I guess except for the fact that Doc should be sitting on the end, if you pay attention, you'll notice we ordered ourselves pretty much in order of entry to grad school. Okay, I don't know how that happened. So I arrived to Stanford in 1973, and in '74 I had the good fortune of joining Dr. Widrow's group. We call him Doc, so I guess I'll just revert to that. All the rest of it seems too long. John Triper will speak after me, and probably will be one of the more engaging speakers. It's always good to speak before him instead of after him. Arrived in '74, and we shared an office together. Lloyd had since disappeared before then, at that time, and Ted used to come around, and they were still doing stuff at Intel, a company we'd barely heard of, and we had no money, and as grad students, but we should have taken everything we had and gone out and invested it in Intel at the time. We just didn't know that. But when Ted would come around to see Doc, I mean, they had a good relationship, and we'd be sitting outside of Doc's office, and this is the '70s. We all had long, greasy hair and wore ratty jeans and stuff like that, and Ted came in from work and looked pretty normal. But we always thought he was a little crazy because he was telling us how they were going to build a computer that would fit inside our briefcase rather than the one that was the size of a refrigerator in the basement. And so we tended to ignore him. But we all knew LMS because we were in school at a period where if you didn't do something with LMS, you didn't graduate. Okay? And, so let me see. This is, how do I fill the page with this? Sorry. I'm a technophobe too. Sorry?
Go to view and
This is him. This is what he's doing. There we go. Okay, so you've seen this picture before, and I wasn't sure if anybody else would be drawing it. It was in some of Doc's slides, but I pulled this out of the book with Sam because I couldn't find my copy of Adaptive Switching Circuits. I have to say that our office when we were in Durant, so this was a built-in 70-ish, 71, something like that. It was a new building built during the protests against the Vietnam War. I guess the first month it was built, they smashed all the windows on the ground floor. So we were there a couple of years later, and we're in this building, and we're put in a room that has no windows. It was an internal room, and it turned out that that's where Doc stored all of his old PhD theses and technical reports. So I got one of everything that I kept carrying around with me for a while.
I still have it.
You still have them, okay. So, but I couldn't find it the other day. So this is out of Widrow and Stearns, but it's the same picture. And I guess my impression, we heard a little bit from Ted and Doc about the genesis of the LMS algorithm, but our impression now, which is a little bit, maybe a little bit over 10 years later, is it doesn't have a nonlinear element anymore. It's strictly the signal processing component. And what I have to say is also that when I arrived at Stanford, I wanted to do adaptive control, not signal processing. But it turns out that Doc was the only faculty member in the entire university that we could find that was doing any digital signal processing. It was one of those, it's hard to, I guess, realize for those of you that are a little bit younger. Until now, I guess I'm not thinking of myself as old, but I guess I should. DSP was a subject that yeah, it's only numbers. DSP was a subject that I never took. When I was an undergrad, it was a grad course, and by the time I got to be a grad student, it was an undergrad course. And so I actually TA'd with Doc, and when he taught digital signal processing, and that's how I learned it. Sittler's notes, right? So that was quite an education for me, and John was actually a TA in the class. Sorry, a student in the class when I was a TA. So if you wanted to do DSP, adaptive or not, this was the only game at Stanford at the time. So because of that, he did attract a wide variety, as Lloyd mentioned earlier, very good students. And I'll admit right up front that I didn't finish with Dr. Widrow. So I actually changed to somebody that did control in my last year or so. And but at the time, there was just no one else that you could work with that was doing digital signal processing. We attracted, therefore, a very interesting group and very terrific bunch of students. So I guess to refresh your memory, my feeling is, from this distance, is there were two things that were put together for LMS and its use that, in my opinion, left me with 30 years of my career to kind of do more things on that. So that's partly what I'm going to do, is I'm going to spend this time, since I don't have too many opportunities, to say thank you personally to Doc, because I haven't had too many chances to do that. So I'm going to spend most of my time now at least saying that. But the two things that I thought they put together, which they didn't really mention earlier, one was this linear combiner structure. So in other words, where you have inputs going to weights that you adjust, you sum them up, and you compare them to a desired signal. I know it looks completely trivial now, but what you do, if you have that structure and you want to minimize or do a gradient descent on the squared error, it turns out that, if you will, the derivative vector is very simple. It's so simple that that's what makes LMS this very compact form. The second thing, of course, though, was, and Doc did mention this a little bit, rather than actually fooling around with trying to find, if you will, the bottom of the bowl in an expected squared error sense, you just took whatever you had for the current value of the error and did the derivative on that. And if you kept doing that over and over again, the algorithm itself would effectively do the averaging for you. And so there's been just mountains of work, as you may well be aware, since then, of trying to prove how and why this algorithm works in many, many different settings. But it's that robust kernel, if you will, of the update that I worked off of for the next 30 years of my career. But there were a couple of things that had to be true for this to work. And one of them was that none of the inputs could be dependent on the outputs. This really had to be something where the inputs were coming in, you added them together, you updated them, you created an output, but none of the inputs coming in could be influenced by the choices you made. As soon as you did that, the derivative got to be really nasty. And the second thing is that you had to have a desired response. You had to know something about what it was you were trying to match. And there have been many, many clever applications, and I guess Lloyd should have said a little bit more about his PhD work. Some of them were included in the antenna work about how you might be able to find these various things. I'm thinking of Monty Frost and some of the other students as well. So I guess what happened for me was I never wanted to be anything except an academic. This is why I always tell stories. Ted doesn't know this about Ted in my classes when I do signal processing, because of the various work that he's done. I mean, it's astounding. I've read some articles actually describing your work for when you were doing the expert witness and that kind of thing. Pretty fascinating, way beyond my means. I'm much more of an academic. I enjoy teaching. And so all of this other stuff is just a vehicle for me to have a teaching position, I guess I should say. Okay? So having admitted that, I'm now